The names are almost all known nationally. Ed Koch, Rudy Giuliani, David Dinkins, Al Sharpton, Larry Kramer, and Donald Trump. These are people who were first in the news in the 1980s. Their early public lives are now featured in Jonathan Mahler's book, The Gods of New York. The book is divided into 4 large chapters, titled 1986, 87, 1988, 1989. Mr. Mahler, a feature writer for the New York Times Magazine, closes his book with this last paragraph. The existential questions that New York faced as it entered 1986 were answered. The great working class city was gone, and so was any realistic expectation that it might ever be bound by a single culture. Rich, poor, very rich, very poor, for better and for worse, everyone would now live in their own New York. Jonathan Mahler, where'd you grow up?
I grew up a little bit in Southern California and a little bit in New York.
What's a little bit in New York?
Well, if you want the full story, I was born in New York. My family moved to Southern California. And then when I was in high school, back in the 1980s, they came back to New York and were here ever since. Both my parents were real New Yorkers, born and raised. So even when I was living in California, when we were living in California, I still kind of felt like a New Yorker that was just living in the wrong place.
If somebody had never been to New York and said to you, "What can you give me 2 minutes of what it is?"
What New York is?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's the greatest city on earth, I would say. It's a sprawling, 5 boroughs that are each incredibly distinctive, and each borough within itself is incredibly distinctive, with different ethnic neighborhoods, with the richest people in the world, with a lot of extreme poverty. It's the most expensive restaurants you can find. It's a beautiful city in parts, and it's a very unattractive city in parts. It's got some great bridges, and it's got a whole lot of people who are really kind of smashed up against each other, commuting together on the subway, crowding into neighborhoods together. It's a place that's it's a difficult place to live in many ways, but it's also kind of an exciting place to live, I would say.
Give us a quick snapshot on Ed Koch as mayor of New York.
Yeah. So let's see, where would you like me to start? Because Ed Koch was mayor for 3 terms. He was elected initially in 1977. He was, at the time, the city was really had fallen on hard times. It was people who aren't from New York have probably seen the movies or familiar with movies like Taxi Driver or The Warriors. The city was dangerous. It was covered in graffiti. It was poor. It was run down. That's the city that Koch took over in 1977. And during his first 2 terms into the mid 80s, the city really went through an amazing rebirth. It was and it was really driven in large part by Wall Street and by the real estate industry. The city really bounced back in the first half of the 1980s, and became, that's when Trump Tower was built and many other sort of famous skyscrapers. The thing about this rebirth was that it was a little complicated because the city was booming for some New Yorkers. Some New Yorkers were getting wealthy. But because of the nature of this rebirth, because it was led really by the finance industry, by Wall Street and by real estate, a lot of New Yorkers were not part of the rebirth. So the city, this was really the period of time during Koch's 3rd term when the city started to separate into the rich and the poor, into 2 cities, really.
Al Sharpton, C. Vernon Mason, Alton Maddox. What about those three?
Yeah. So they were, they formed an unholy trinity, you might say, of kind of rabble rousers. Sharpton was sort of the front man, and they were focused on really on racism and on the criminal justice system and sort of the racism of the criminal justice system and of the NYPD during these years, during the 1980s. And Sharpton was, as I said, sort of the front man, the PR guy. Alton Maddox and Vernon Mason were both lawyers. They were sort of civil rights lawyers who would take on whatever case they could that would get publicity and draw attention to their cause. So they were intimately involved in several very high profile kind of racial incidents that led to criminal cases.
Jonathan Mahler, author of Gods of New York.
Did Tawana Brawley, was she raped?
Tawana Brawley was by all accounts not raped. Yes, I mean there was a grand jury report done by New York State. Tawana Brawley, just to remind listeners, was a black teenager who claimed to have been abducted and raped over the course of several days by a group of white men. Al Sharpton and as you mentioned, Vernon Mason and Alton Maddox kind of championed her cause. And initially, there was no reason to doubt her account. But over time, she was unwilling to testify. Her mother was unwilling to testify. A grand jury was convened and conducted an investigation, and no evidence was found that she had been abducted and raped.
Did you talk to her?
No, she doesn't talk to the media. She actually converted to Islam. She was converted by Reverend Louis Farrakhan, really right in the immediate aftermath of all of this, and I believe lives in Virginia, but has never talked to any reporters or writers.
Robert Chambers, who was he?
Robert Chambers was the preppy killer, the preppy murderer. He was a young man who was living on the Upper East Side in the 1980s and 1986, and was out in the park one night with a young woman who was on her way back to college in the fall, Jennifer Levin, and he murdered her really in Central Park. I mean, he was acquitted of I mean, he was not convicted of murder, but he killed her. And he argued that it was in self-defense, that they were having rough sex, and that he was just trying to throw her off him. And remarkably, his lawyer was able to put at least enough doubt in the jury's mind that they came to a last minute kind of settlement during jury deliberations, and he was given a very, very modest sentence.
I think he's 50.
Went back in jail for drugs, but yeah.
I think he's 58 today. Do you have any idea where he is?
He's out again. So he got out, and he was. I don't remember exactly how many years he was out for, but he was out, for a little while, and then he went back in jail for drugs. And then I heard recently that he's out again. So I think I don't know where he's living, but he's apparently no longer in jail.
What's the Howard Beach story? The
Howard Beach story was a sort of infamous incident that also happened in 1986, where a group of young black men were out in their car out in Queens on a Saturday night in December 1986. Their car broke down. Three of them. There were four of them total. One stayed with the car. Three of them walked into the nearest neighborhood to try to get help or to go back home to their neighborhood in Brooklyn. And these three black men were the closest neighborhood was Howard Beach, Queens, which was a predominantly white neighborhood, Italian working class neighborhood. And these three black men were immediately kind of spotted as an unusual presence in this neighborhood on a Saturday night. They went into a pizzeria. It was about midnight to get some pizza before they tried to make their way home. When they emerged from the pizzeria, there was a gang of white youths hanging out outside with baseball bats and tree limbs. They chased these three guys down. One escaped. One was kind of, was beaten, and one was chased out onto the expressway and was run over by a car and killed. So this became a huge story in New York, and these young men were all tried and convicted.
Did Sharpton and company get involved?
They did, and they did something kind of amazing. They were very skeptical that the Queen's DA would prosecute this case vigorously, and they had reason to be skeptical. Historically, the Queen's DA had not done right by the Black community, and in this particular case, the one of the three men, one of the survivors who'd been beaten, happened to actually be the stepfather of the one who was killed, and when he was picked up by the police and tried to explain to them what was going on, they didn't believe him. They thought that he was up to no good in their neighborhood. So he was frisked. He was interrogated for hours while his stepson was lying dead on the expressway. So they had every reason to be suspicious of the Queen's DA. And so what they decided to do was to refuse to cooperate, to have Maddox and Mason, who represented the two survivors of the attack, they decided they would withhold their cooperation, and they would not talk to their clients, would not talk to the Queen's DA unless the governor of New York State, Mario Cuomo at the time, appointed an independent prosecutor to replace the Queen's DA with an independent prosecutor to prosecute this case. And it was a bold move, because they were basically preventing this case from going forward. But they knew, or they believed, that there would be so much press attention and so much pressure on Cuomo to do something because of this horrendous attack that had happened, that he would ultimately cave in, and he did. He appointed a special prosecutor, and this prosecutor did a great job and won convictions.
Jonathan Mahler, author of Gods of New York.
Bernard Goetz is 77.
Yeah.
Why should we know that name?
Well, Bernard Goetz was a famous or infamous figure during these years, because he had in 1984 been accosted on a subway by a group of young black men, black teenagers, 5 of them, and they had asked him for $5, and he believed he was being mugged, and he had a gun on him, and he shot them all. Pulled out his gun and shot them on the subway. He then, the train, of course, stopped. He leapt off, disappeared into the tunnel, and ran off. And for several days, the story was all over the tabloids. But no one knew who this individual was. No one knew the name Bernie Goetz yet. He was just the Death Wish gunman, the vigilante hero who had fought back. Then Goetz turned himself in up in New Hampshire, and came back down to New York to be prosecuted, and he became a folk hero in New York, because he was fighting back. He had defended himself on the subway, but over time he became a more complicated figure, because it became clear that he had said many racist things himself in the past. It became clear that really was his intention. He had admitted to the police during his interrogation that it was his intention to kill these guys. He wanted to kill them, and he nearly had. In one case, he actually did paralyze one of the young men. So his case became turned into a huge fault line in the city. He was a national figure. I mean, international figure. Everyone knew Bernie Goetz, the vigilante gunman, and a lot of the city, a lot of the country, a lot of the world thought of him as a hero, and another part of the city and the country and the world thought of him as really a cold-blooded, near killer.
Did he go to prison?
He received only. He was basically acquitted. The only charge that he was convicted of was illegal gun possession. So, I mean, he was effectively acquitted. Yeah.
Where is he today?
Bernie Goetz is. It's a good question. I mean, I think he's. I know. I recall a story about him not too long ago. But I don't know whether he's still around. Yeah. Do you know?
Did you talk to him?
No, I didn't. I talked to other people who were involved in the case and the investigation, but I didn't talk to him.
What's the story behind the Tompkins Square Park incident?
Yeah. So the Tompkins Square riots were happened in the summer of 1988. They were there was it's a park in the Lower East Side of New York that has a long history. That neighborhood has a long history of radicalism, of it's a kind of a gathering place for anarchists and other kinds of radicals. In the 80s, the neighborhood around it was starting to become gentrified. And so, what had been a really kind of hard-edged neighborhood was becoming, was getting its first families. Buildings were getting renovated and being turned into co-ops and condos. And Tompkins Square Park was a gathering place for punks, the homeless, drug users, and they would make a lot of noise late into the night, especially in the summer. And some of the new residents started to complain to the police about all the late night noise. And the police decided that they would, and with Mayor Koch's support, that they would impose a curfew on the park and shut it down, at midnight. So they tried to do that. And all of these kind of local radicals and others kind of came to the park to defend the park, and to really they were fighting gentrification as well, and a huge riot erupted. And I mean, it was you sort of can't believe it, but there were police rampaging around the surrounding neighborhood on horseback, beating people. A lot of this was caught on video. It was a massive riot.
What happened to the participants? Many of them go to jail or prison?
No. So what happened is that the police department was under pressure to really investigate what had happened, and they did an investigation. It was a good and thorough investigation. There was an excellent police report that accused the department itself of gross misconduct and abuse, which is, the police commissioner himself, Benjamin Ward, at the time called it a police riot, which is, was a striking thing. However, in the end, none of the officers who were, called to testify were willing to testify, and nothing. Very few people were punished. I mean, there were some people where commanders were moved out of their precincts, and that was about the extent of it.
Jonathan Mahler, author of Gods of New York.
On January the 13th, 1991, Al Sharpton was stabbed in the stomach. Why?
Yeah, well, that was so Sharpton. This was beyond the sort of period of time that my book covers. But after my book ends in 1990, after 1990, that he was continuing to do protests, and he was stabbed at a protest in Bensonhurst, which is where a young man named Yusuf Hawkins had been murdered in 1989, and he was continuing to run protests there. Yeah.
Tell us more about Yusuf Hawkins.
Yeah. So this was yet another powerful racial incident that happened during these years. It was in the summer of 1989, and Yusuf Hawkins was a young black teenager who just graduated from high school, and he was going to a neighborhood, Bensonhurst, another heavily Italian American white neighborhood in Brooklyn, and going to look at a used car, and went out there, and he and a couple friends, they got off the subway and were walking down the streets. They got chased by a group of young white guys, and they were cornered, and they thought they were just gonna get beat up, and one of them pulled out a gun. One of the young white guys pulled out a gun and shot and murdered Yusuf Hawkins. So this happened in the summer of 1989, in the midst of a mayoral race with where David Dinkins, who was vying to be New York's first black mayor, was running. And this incident, this murder of Yusuf Hawkins, became a major event in New York, particularly on the eve of this mayoral election with a black candidate.
But again, the stabbing of Al Sharpton resulted in what after that? What did that do? We now see Al Sharpton getting $500,000 a year on MSNBC. A million after all this time.
Yeah.
He's lost 175 pounds. He doesn't look at all like he did back then.
Yeah. So that was his So he was as he tells the story, I mean, that was his he was reborn. He nearly died. He woke up in a hospital bed, and he called in some of the people who he had been having feuds with, including Jesse Jackson, and he decided that he didn't want to just be a troublemaker, to be a guy who just made a lot of noise. He wanted to try to be more effective, a more kind of moderate, a more willing to, more kind of open to dialogue sort of figure. And so he really went from being this flamethrower, this guy who was really just would say anything, to being a guy who, I mean, was very close to Barack Obama, Michael Jackson. He's as you say, he's a regular fixture on MSNBC. He's an establishment figure. I mean, I guess that's the best way to put it. That was the moment that he went from being an anti-establishment figure to an establishment figure.
Has he ever answered the Tawana Brawley situation, and
Not
whether
really.
or not?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, I talked to him about it. Sure. I mean, he won't quite acknowledge that it was. He won't say the word that it was. He won't say the word hoax. He won't say this was a hoax. He will say that he was misled by the lawyers, that he believed the lawyers, and that he believed her. But he has always sort of stopped short of acknowledging that this is an incredibly irresponsible and destructive thing to do, which it was.
Central Park jogger.
Yeah.
The story.
Yeah. So the Central Park jogger was a young woman, an investment banker who was jogging in the park in the spring of 1989, and she was attacked and raped and left unconscious. And that same night, a group of young black men were out in the park, getting into some trouble, picking some fights, and they were rounded up and very quickly accused of having raped and nearly murdered this young woman who was, she was in the hospital at the time, and the city, with the leadership of the media, the city, immediately was ready to convict these young men, the Central Park Five, as they became known, long before there was really any evidence, and well before there was a trial, and the city was calling for blood, and that is indeed what happened. They were all prosecuted and convicted without any shred of physical evidence. And years later, they were ultimately exonerated, and a different individual was found guilty of the crime.
How much did the city of New York have to pay these individuals?
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the exact figure, but millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars. I mean, they were in jail for many years.
Jonathan Mahler, author of Gods of New York.
I read it in your book. It's like $41 million or something like that.
Yeah, it was a lot of money.
Each one of them got $7 million.
Yeah, okay, that sounds right. Yeah.
Why? I mean, how does something like that work? Everybody that goes to prison that was innocent, do they all get money like this after it's over?
I mean, I think, I would say that if you are wrongfully accused, wrongfully convicted, and in a case like this where these young men lost, many years. I mean, more than I don't remember exactly how many years they were in jail, but for well over a decade. That's a pretty you got a pretty good case on your hands, I would say. And the city was desperate. The city settled the suit. I mean, they wanted to reach a settlement. They didn't want this to go to trial. Yeah.
And one of the 5 is now on the city council in New York.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
You talked to him?
I did. I tried, and he was not accessible to me. So yeah.
Was Trish Mealy, the woman who was raped, available to you?
No, she was not either. She doesn't talk to the media either. Yeah.
And how did they find? I mean, this Matthias Reyes, who was the guy that showed up years later. Yeah. Why did he show up in the process?
He had been. I mean, he was a serial rapist. So there were lots of other cases that he had been involved in that they and so he was he was arrested. Then he eventually confessed to it. He admitted to having done it. So it was there was no it didn't require a lot of shoe leather.
And I assume he's still in prison.
Yeah.
I don't know whether maybe it's just because of the time of year that I'm reading this book and the year that I'm reading this book, but I sensed that you had a parallel story that you were telling. One of them was Al Sharpton, and the other one was Donald Trump.
Yeah. Well, there are 2 of the characters in the book, certainly.
Well, I know. Well, there are a lot more characters, but it seemed like those 2, there was a similar story you were telling throughout your book. And but give us the thread on Donald Trump, what you found during this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think of this really as these years as Donald Trump's crucible. I mean, this is when Donald Trump learned. People I think mistakenly think about The Apprentice as being the origin story of Donald Trump. It really was New York, and in particular the tabloid culture of New York in the 1980s, where Donald Trump learned how to capture the public's attention. And that's what he did. He did it largely through the media, through the tabloids, and also through the New York Times, I should say. And he learned that he could do and say outrageous things as he started to do during those years, and that people would pay attention. It's you make the connection to Sharpton. Well, Sharpton sort of learned the same thing, using those same tools during that same period of time. Sharpton had very different aims, not entirely different aims, because Sharpton too was engaged in an act of self-promotion, but he was also fighting for a larger cause. Donald Trump was really trying to just build his image and build his fortune. So you see him do things like humiliate Mayor Koch by renovating the Woolman ice skating rink in Central Park by basically pressuring Koch publicly into giving Trump that job, so that Trump could say that the city failed to do this, so I will. You see him, for instance, getting involved in the Central Park 5 case, taking out an ad in all the daily papers saying that these young men should be executed. So you see him kind of begin to develop both his political instincts, but really more to the point, his narrative instincts, his ability to kind of tell a story and to grab hold of the public's attention. And that's what he learned to do. And in a way, he only could have done this, I think, in a moment when our culture was so infatuated with wealth. That's what happened in the 1980s in New York and in America. Everyone knows the movie Wall Street, and greed is good. And this was when Wall Street became such a powerful cultural force. I think someone like Trump could only have kind of risen up and become a kind of an iconic national, international figure in a moment in time when we were suddenly so interested in wealth.
By the way, watching him as president and as a candidate and also doing this book, is there anything that he's doing as president that surprises you?
Nothing. No. I mean, I think it was all, you can sort of see all the seeds of it then. I mean, I think we didn't quite know, and even in 2016, we didn't know what his political beliefs really were. Did he have political beliefs? So I would say that in as much as there's an ideology to Donald Trump, and as much as MAGA is an ideology, and that speaks to how he views the world, I think that was still coming into focus for him probably in the 1980s. But in terms of how he accumulates and wields power, in terms of how he sees this sense of America's cities are bastions of crime and we need to take control of them. The sort of racial lens through which I think he sees the world. Those are all very much clear and present in 1980s Donald Trump.
Not a big deal, but tell us the story about the art of the deal and Joni Evans and Aspen.
Yeah, that's a fun story, but a bit of a side note, but it's a good story. So Trump published The Art of the Deal in 1987. Of course, this was a book. This was the book that made Donald Trump famous. I mean, truly. I mean, he was a New York celebrity before The Art of the Deal, but no one around the country knew who Donald Trump was until this book came out and became a big bestseller. And he didn't write the book. He had a ghostwriter, Tony Schwartz, who wrote the entire book and acknowledged, and I interviewed him. He fabricated much of what he wrote. I mean, he was writing the book that he thought Donald Trump wanted, but the book was selling great, and Donald got out to Aspen for vacation in Christmas, and he went into the Aspen bookstore. And they had run out of copies of his book. And so he called the publisher of Random House, Joni Evans, and absolutely shooed her out, lost his mind. And she said, this is good news. We're going to get more books out there like momentarily. And he insisted that, no, we need books here now. And she said, well, it's 2 days before Christmas. Our warehouse is closed, and she really didn't know what to do. He was not willing to listen to her. So then he called Cy Newhouse, her boss, the owner of Random House, among many magazines, and Cy Newhouse arranged to have the books printed. Trump sent a plane for them and picked them up and flew them out to Aspen.
Why would Cy Newhouse, that family has owned lots and lots of media, including the New Yorker magazine, but why would Cy Newhouse respond that way to Donald Trump? I mean, we're seeing a lot of this today with beating up on the media and all that, and suing and all. Is there any story related to that why he would respond to that way? I mean, who cares? We'll get the books out there on our time, not on yours.
Yeah. Well, Cy Newhouse, in fact, suggested that Donald Trump write The Art of the Deal. He kind of talked Donald Trump into writing the book. And he did so because he owned one of the magazines he owned was GQ. And GQ had done a cover story about Trump a couple years earlier in 1984, I think it was, and it had sold very well. So Newhouse thought, well, people like reading about you. You should write a book. And so, Newhouse, there's every reason to believe that he was fond of Donald Trump and that he was wanted to keep him happy. I mean, the logic, kind of the logical inference here.
Jonathan Mahler, author of Gods of New York.
Who was Larry Kramer, and why did he hate Koch?
Yeah. Larry Kramer was a gay activist who started ACT UP, the great activist movement that was, bringing attention to the AIDS crisis in the 1980s. He was also a writer, had written movies, had written plays, had written novels, but really what made him famous ultimately, and I think his kind of most important legacy was creating ACT UP. And ACT UP's favorite target was Ed Koch, because it was Larry Kramer's contention in particular that Koch had failed to address the AIDS crisis and had cost millions of lives because he was in the closet, because he was gay, and he did not want to draw attention to that fact. And so Kramer was furious at Koch, felt betrayed by Koch, blamed him for the deaths of so many New Yorkers of AIDS, and made it his life's mission, honestly, to publicly attack and humiliate Ed Koch whenever he could. And he, in fact, tried to out Ed Koch unsuccessfully, but he devoted a lot of energy to trying to get the media to write about Koch's sexuality.
You several times in the book talk about he was afraid that Koch was afraid that Kramer was going to show up at a public event and yell, which he did often, at him. Didn't they live in the same building?
Well, after the mayoralty, that was it's an amazing kind of postscript. Koch, he serves 3 terms, and he's voted out in 1989. And at that time, he'd been living in Gracie Mansion, the mayoral home, for many years at this point. But he had kept a small apartment down in Greenwich Village. And some of his close friends said, "Look, you're coming out of Gracie Mansion. You've been the mayor for all these years. You can't move back into your little 1-bedroom apartment. Please get yourself a bigger apartment, at least a 2-bedroom apartment." So he agrees. He has someone find him a 2-bedroom apartment. And lo and behold, it's in the very same building as Larry Kramer, who was truly his chief tormentor for many, many years. Larry Kramer is, of course, thrilled at the prospect of Ed Koch moving in, because he feels like it will give him so many opportunities to publicly confront him in the mailroom, in the lobby, in the elevator, and call him a murderer, which is what Larry Kramer did every time he saw Koch in the building. He would call him a murderer.
Bess Meyerson.
Bess Meyerson is a really fascinating figure. Also, she was the first Jewish Miss America. We're going back now into the 1940s, but she became a celebrity. She was just a otherwise anonymous young Jewish woman from working class Bronx, and she became a celebrity after that, and was on various presidential panels, was on quiz shows, was on television. And when Koch was running for mayor in 1977, he was concerned, and his media advisor was concerned, that because he was a single bachelor living in Greenwich Village, people would believe he was gay. Remember, this is a very different time in our country's history, where a politician, it would have been risky and possibly entirely self-destructive to be out and gay and running for mayor of New York. So his media advisor was concerned that people would whisper about Koch's sexuality. So he said, "You need to have a woman by your side." And the woman they settled on ultimately, after some misses, was Bess Meyerson, who was a glamorous, as I said, former Miss America, and former Jewish Miss America, which worked well because Koch was a very publicly Jewish, and she was by his side throughout much of the campaign. She was his beard, and he would say things like, "Well, things go my way, there could be a wedding at Gracie Mansion, and he played this all up, and he was elected. There was no wedding at Gracie Mansion, but he did ultimately give Bess Myerson a couple of jobs in his administration, and everything seemed to be okay. And then she got involved in a kind of messy scandal, which was a little bit complicated, but sort of tawdry and maybe worth explaining. She was divorced several times, and she started having an affair with a local gangster, with a kind of wealthy New York mobbed up guy who kind of owned sewer companies in New York. And that guy's wife, Andy Carpaccio was his name. His wife found out about their affair and filed for divorce. And Bess Myerson basically was accused of trying to bribe the judge who was presiding over the divorce proceedings to lower his alimony payments. So she got caught up in that scandal, which became known as the Bess mess. It was a great kind of tabloid scandal in New York, and of course Koch got caught up in it too, because she was in his administration, and they were close.
Jonathan Mahler, author of Gods of New York.
Let me switch just a little bit for a moment. Brooklyn has 2.5 million people in it. Queens 2.2 million. Manhattan 1.6. Bronx 1.3. Staten Island 480,000. Is there any way to describe, we started out talking about this, the difference among those boroughs, and why is it they each have a president?
Yeah, well, I mean, they all do operate with a degree of independence. It's I can characterize some of their differences, but they will be generalizations, because as you say, each one has a really large population, and there's a range of classes and ethnicities in each of the boroughs. So, in a general sense, Staten Island is the smallest and the most conservative. It's the Republican borough. It's the most kind of isolated from the others. There's no bridge from Staten Island to Manhattan. There's one to Brooklyn, and there are a couple to New Jersey. But if you want to get from Manhattan to Staten Island, you have to take the ferry. Brooklyn, where I live, in fact, is an incredibly diverse borough. There are very wealthy people in certain neighborhoods in Brooklyn. In particular, Brooklyn Heights is very, very fancy neighborhood. But there are also neighborhoods that are, projects, poor, and it's a sprawling borough. Similar with Queens. Queens has a lot of immigrants, a lot of newer immigrants land in Queens. The Bronx was historically, my father grew up in the Bronx. He was a Jewish middle class, lower middle class kid in the Bronx. It was a very popular neighborhood at one point for Jewish immigrants, and now is still an largely immigrant neighborhood. Manhattan, of course, is really still, I guess you would say, the center of it all. It's where the big office buildings are. It's where most of the, I shouldn't say, Brooklyn now has a lot of great restaurants as well, but of course it's where Broadway is, and it's where Central Park is. So it's in many ways, it's New York is 5 different cities, I guess you could say, or 5 different countries almost, really.
How did you get involved in journalism in the first place?
Well, I worked at I went to Northwestern, and I worked at the paper there, and I thought I would, when I got out of college, I thought, well, I'd love to spend my life doing this, because if I can, because I like to write. I like to learn things. I felt like it would be, I didn't see myself sitting at a desk all day, every day. I wanted to get out in the world and see things and meet people and talk to people. And I wanted to kind of keep my education going in a way. And so I thought I'd give it a try. And I, got my first job in journalism, and then I got my second job in journalism. And, you know,
Where was your first and second?
yeah. So my first job was actually in TV. I worked at what was then the McNeil-Lehrer News Hour. Then it became the Jim Lehrer News Hour, and now it's just the News Hour. So that was my first job, and then I went to work at Dow Jones and the wire service for the Wall Street Journal, basically. And I did that for a few years, and that was I didn't really enjoy it, but it was great training because working for a wire service, you have to learn to work very quickly. You have to write fast, and you have to write a lot. So it was kind of perfect training for a young journalist. And then I started moving into kind of longer form writing. I would say I went to work for a weekly newspaper called The Forward, kind of a sort of a Jewish weekly newspaper. That was a great experience. And then I started getting into magazines, and I eventually found my way to the New York Times, and have moved around a little bit at the Times, but have for the most part been at the Sunday Magazine, where I write kind of longer features that typically take me a few months.
One thing that comes up in your book a lot is something called WLIB.
Yeah.
Stands for Liberty.
Yeah.
It's a radio station. It's an AM radio station. They now have an FM, but it's an AM radio station. What role did that play through the 80s that you write about?
Yeah, so I mean, WLIB was a Black-owned radio station, and it was a Black radio station. So they had several kind of important talk shows in the morning with where people would call in, and it was for Black New Yorkers in this period of time, really when the media the media establishment was predominantly, it was white owned, and it was predominantly tilted toward interests of white New Yorkers, and at a time when Black poverty was rising, Black crime, both perpetrated against the Black community and by young Black men, were rising. Police brutality toward the Black community was rising. The criminal justice system was mistreating Black people. There were a lot of issues of interest to the Black community that were not getting covered in the white mainstream media. And so during this period of time, WLIB became a very important voice for Black New Yorkers who didn't feel like they were getting information and news, and also just didn't feel like they had a way to kind of connect to others in their community to talk about issues that mattered, in particular to them. So it was an important kind of gathering place for Black New Yorkers during these years.
Jonathan Mahler, author of Gods of New York.
What about the newspaper? There was Amsterdam News, but there was, what is it?
There was City Sun also, which was sort of like the Village Voice for the Black community. And then there was the Amsterdam News, which is kind of the historic Black newspaper in New York. So yeah, they were also important sources of information for Black New Yorkers. But because of the call-in shows on WLIB, it was almost like a town square. It was you could say. Yeah.
Was Malcolm X's wife working there at WLIB during this time?
She was in this time. She didn't come up in any of my in any of the interviews I did. So it's a good question. I don't know. Yeah.
When did you start this book?
Well, I'm kind of embarrassed to say. I started this book in 2017. So it was 8 years in the making.
How much did Donald Trump being president have to do with your interest in this kind of a book?
Yeah, I mean, it actually kind of launched my interest in this book just simply because I was working at the Times, and in 2016 I was assigned to the campaign, the political campaign. That was, of course, when he ran for president the first time, and I was one of a handful of writers who were just assigned to write longer pieces about the histories of some of the candidates. Because I had previously written a book about New York in the 1970s, I took a sort of special interest in Donald Trump in the 80s. So that work got me interested in this period of time in New York. And so it was Trump really like launched me into my kind of journey for this book. But I'd never really intended for it to be a book about him exactly.
You write a lot about Rudy Giuliani, who was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Would you have guessed, based on what you read about him, wrote about him back in those days, excuse me, that he would end up where he is today?
When you say where he is today, you mean right now, right?
Right now.
Not where he was before his fall. No, I mean it's astounding to me. I mean, I think to see to his rise was not surprising to me, because you could see he was incredibly ambitious as the U.S. attorney during these years. I mean, almost hormonally, abnormally ambitious, and he the fact that he rose to political success, not surprising. The fall has been the spectacular fall has been a surprise, I think, because I don't think I think the sense I had of him during this period was that he was certainly very ambitious, certainly morally malleable, but the lines that he seems to have been willing to cross, I never would have imagined that this Giuliani would be willing to cross. I mean, he was a guy who really built his reputation on being as the morally righteous prosecutor, the kind of the guy who was gonna clean up the city, root out the corruption, root out the criminals. He talked a lot about how he thought about becoming a priest. Then you look at the sorts of things he's done in recent years, and it's very hard to square. Yeah.
We started off talking about the Trinity, Al Sharpton and C. Vernon Mason and Alton Maddox. Maddox died in 2023 at age 77.
Yep.
What did he do for a living after all of these different cases? And
Yeah.
C. Vernon Mason is still alive. What's he doing?
Yeah. So Maddox lost his law license because of the Tawana Brawley case, and it's interesting because he might not have lost it, but he was unwilling to show up at the hearings. He protested his own hearings, and therefore they stripped him of his license, so he couldn't practice law. I honestly, he had like a blog at some point. I don't know how he made a living after this. I really don't. But he was sort of more and more out there. His views were kind of got crazier and crazier. He was a brilliant lawyer. He was a very, very good, smart lawyer. But so sort of, he went off the rails, clearly. Vernon Mason, interestingly, C. Vernon Mason, and I did speak to him for this book. Maddox wouldn't talk to me, but Mason was very helpful. He also lost his law license, not because of the Tawana Brawley thing. It was an unrelated issue with his clients and malpractice. And then he went to divinity school. He went to seminary, and he is still up at Columbia, at the seminary at Columbia. So, that's where he landed. And of course, we all know where Sharpton landed.
So after all the research and all in this book, is there another book that can come out of this? What you did here, you did the book on the Bronx, and now you've done this book on the gods of New York. Is there another kind of book you're already thinking about?
I am just beginning to, and I think I don't think I'm inclined to keep going forward in time. I don't think, for instance, I want to write about New York in the 90s or the 2000s. But I'm more open to the possibility of maybe going back in time in New York, but I'm not quite sure yet. I'm still publicizing this and digesting and taking a breather.
Out of all the interviews you've done on the book tour, is there a pattern as to what people are interested in?
What's interesting about this book is that, and it's both what's kind of fun about it and also what makes it a little bit challenging in some ways, is that there are a lot of different characters in this book. There are a lot of different storylines. I try my best, and I think I succeed at weaving them all together, so you feel like it's a should read a little bit like a good novel. And but because there are so many different storylines, different interviewers tend to grab onto different things. So some of the more politically oriented podcasts and TV and radio shows I've done, of course, wanted to talk about Donald Trump. Whereas others have focused on different characters, different aspects of the book. So it really just has depended on the interviewer.
We'll wrap it up, but I do want to ask you this question, because Ed Koch was mayor for 12 years. He won 3 terms, and then he lost in a primary to David Dinkins when he ran for the 4th term. Why? What happened?
Well, New York was done with Ed Koch, I think. These 4 years, his 3rd term, the city had really unraveled. I mean, these were the years that the AIDS crisis exploded. These were the years that the crack epidemic exploded. Homelessness was exploding. That's a subject we didn't talk about, but that's a big theme in the book as well. There were all these racial incidents. Plus the Wall Street crash in 1987, Black Monday, which decimated the city's finances. So, he had sort of a limited ability to deal with all these ongoing crises. And I think people had gotten, tired of his shtick. They'd had enough of Ed Koch. Even still, it was still shocking. Because he was so larger than life. He really had the feel of mayor for life. This guy was not going anywhere, and so it was still quite a stunning political event when Ed Koch lost that primary.
Thank you, Jonathan Mahler. The name of the book is The Gods of New York: Egotists, Idealists, Opportunists, and the Birth of the Modern City, 1986 to 1990. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. I'm a big fan of yours, going back many years. I as an author, I just want to say how much I appreciate what you have done for books. Please keep doing it.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Great to talk.
Thanks for tuning into this week's Booknotes Plus podcast. If you have a moment, please consider rating and reviewing us wherever you listen to podcasts. Your feedback will help others discover the program. And don't forget to share this episode with friends and family. For the latest on new episodes, schedule updates, and more, follow us on X @C-SPAN Radio.